in the initial kind of aftermath of when she passed away, we kind of bonded very much together as a family. You know, we were pushing through it together, but like one of the ways that we were kind of coping was by doing things and by you know, pushing forward, seeing the world move on before I was ready to. I'm going through new phases of what it is to kind of grow up with this illness, and suddenly I'm not sure what's normal and not sure how to feel at times, and it can be, I know it can be difficult even to kind of conceptualize that, or you actually have to confront it and face it and become better, actively healing yourself. My name is Jack Jones. I am a market researcher. I'm 30 years old. I have cystic fibrosis and I've kind of since survived it, or living with it very well now. I had an older sister who passed away from the same illness about 14 years ago. I think I was probably around like 17 or so when I kind of first really reckoned with the fact it was that my sister wouldn't grow old with me. There was, I suppose, multiple realizations over the years, but it was, I think, as the initial shockwaves wore away, that I first kind of recognized that, you know, these are milestones that we're passing, and or kind of seeing the world move on before I was ready to. And then I think it kind of like initially sort of like instilled, or kind of like it started me questioning when similar things might happen to me, and kind of really start reckoning with my own mortality. There was always a little bit of that growing up with cystic fibrosis, but obviously that's a bit of a stark reminder. And I think that one of the bigger effects as well was that it was a bit too big to look at times. So I kind of found it harder and harder to really start conceptualizing a future for myself. I think one of the most clear things about who I was before she died was, I don't know, it's kind of hard to say exactly, but we were a pair, you know? There was always this outlet, there was always this person that understood exactly what you're going through, you know? Living with a long-term illness, it can be quite difficult, both for the person with it, and I take it as well, for the people who care about them and don't have it, to be able to properly understand what how you're feeling and what the actual experience is like. But I was quite fortunate in that respect. I had someone who always knew exactly. It's like, you know, when, you know, you're kind of like, when mum's asking you to go to exercise, but you're feeling like this, and it's like, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I can absolutely kind of relate. And that was, I guess, losing that was a very difficult adjustment in the beginning, because suddenly I'm going through new phases of what it is to kind of grow up with this illness, and suddenly I'm not sure what's normal and not sure how to feel at times, and it can be, I know it can be difficult even to kind of conceptualize that from an outsider's perspective as well, because we only have our own experiences to deal with. Yeah. In the initial kind of aftermath of when she passed away, we kind of bonded very much together as a family. You know, we were pushing through it together, but like one of the ways that we were kind of coping was by doing things and by you know, pushing forward. And I think that while it's very good and a strong way to kind of keep from falling into despair, um, it also kind of stops you from fully reckoning with what is bubbling under the surface, or at least that's how it worked for me. It wasn't like, honestly, until I really felt able to fully reckon with it, kind of able to feel that kind of the pain really in a full way and the full effects of it. Like, we were always able to grieve her loss because it was a huge loss for all of us. But like, I guess to reckon with the actual effects of how it impacted my own worldview, who I was becoming, it wasn't for until I was about 25, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. Maybe a little bit, 24, 25. And that was kind of came to a nexus point. Like, that's when it kind of came to a head, where I was kind of running out of tarmac with this sort of inability to really fully motivate myself for myself. And, I kind of had to ultimately reckon with the fact that I wasn't planning for a future. And the kind of the hurt and upset that caused the rest of my family. So it was kind of like staring into the sun nearly. You kind of don't do it. It's too big, it's too bright, but it's always there, and it's like you can only hide from it for so long. And so I was only kind of after really fully reckoning with that and what my life could mean after having dealt with this, that I really felt able to actually kind of breathe and be myself and find my own meaning, I guess. I remember in kind of as we were coming close to the time when she actually did pass away, and we were never really obviously explicitly stating that this could happen, but you could feel it a little bit, and I remember kind of breaking down a little bit because I didn't want to think of my life in terms of before and after. I guess there was a little bit of an innocence to me before, and I think that's like, innocence is no bad thing, of course, but I think I've become a little bit more world weary, and it's kind of managed to, in the before times, things weren't great. We were always sick, but there was, I guess, like a fragile invincibility type thing where we were like, we were always a little bit like teetering close or like getting sick and things like that. But there was always this feeling of like, it hasn't happened yet, and we've always come back. And I think that obviously was unstable. And I think that like, particularly like young men, it takes a while to get over that. And I think that it kind of came crashing down on me. But I think that's ultimately, it's something you're going to have to learn anyway. So I think the funny thing about grief is like the way I kind of conceptualize it is like, it's kind of like an open wound when it happens, and it's big and it's dramatic and it bleeds and it's requires constant attention, and then eventually it does scar over, but I don't think it ever fully heals. I think that there are these sort of times or triggers that'll kind of set you off a little bit, and I think that, in a way it can feel a little bit like, it can feel quite nice to remember that this person still has this effect on you, that they're not gone. And that, when you watch a film that reminds you of them, or you hear a song and it kind of throws you back, or you kind of get you find some old pictures you hadn't seen before, that is like quite a beautiful pain. But I think that there are times as well where like, there are the quieter aspects of it that can be really insidious, and like can affect your worldview in ways that you don't recognize. You know, and there's stuff that if you trace it back to this obviously cataclysmic incident, like, it makes sense why someone might go down a path like that. In my case, it was that I just was really struggling to even find any reason aside from it'll make everyone else upset if I don't keep going. I kind of had no intrinsic motivation myself. And, you know, those things are inherently unstable. They either have to evolve and change in ways that are going to change you even further away from maybe a healed version of yourself, or you actually have to confront it and face it and become better, actively healing yourself. I do remember on my 20th birthday feeling this very strange, this bittersweetness as I kind of grew older than she ever was. And I guess, you know, it contextualized a lot of like who she was herself, because remembering who I was at 20 years old, you know, she was always my big sister, and therefore her very wise and very like we'd always defer to her on these sort of issues. And it's kind of crazy now, because having grown older than her and presumably you'd hope grown wiser, it's I guess it's changed a little bit of how I kind of live my life, and also make these sort of decisions in my own planning. I think living with cystic fibrosis has like very much it's hard to conceptualize who I'd be without it, is how I guess I'd put it. That I can recognize the differences in me versus people who maybe haven't grown up with a long-term illness, or haven't been forced to reckon with certain inequities and things like that, or had to sometimes face the unfairness of the world. Now, as you get older, you know, the law of chance really dictates that people are going to have to face that at some point. But I think around like when I was younger, I could definitely see that sort of naivety amongst my kind of my friends and peers, I guess. I think that it's changed what I can find joy in. I think that I do try to really make a conscious effort to find the joy in those sort of like the little things. I like to try and consciously stop and appreciate, you know, when I don't have a blocked nose, for example, or kind of like you see a beautiful sunset. I mean, that's an obvious one. But I try to stop and appreciate where I am every once in a while. But I think it's also meant that like I can't get into certain things. Like I'm just if I don't have an interest in something, I find it quite difficult to feign it. But I guess the upside is that my friends know that I'm really genuinely interested in them. So yeah, I try. I think it's a complicated thing. I think that it can, but it's still something that I'm very appreciative of. I think that what I want grief to kind of continually, I suppose, instill in me is that sense of empathy. I'd hate to ever lose that. I think it's what makes us human, and I think it's what makes us able to really be compassionate and connect with others in the way that I appreciate that I can. And obviously, grief isn't the only way to gain that sense of empathy, but it seems to be the way that really accelerated mine. And I think as well, I think it sounds maybe a little bit cliche, but to to appreciate the life that I get to live. It's easy to think of worst case scenarios where your life might be ruined. You know, that's what anxiety is really kind of training you to do. I think it's a conscious effort to really appreciate where you are now and where you can go from here. The opportunities that are laid out in front of you. And I'm very lucky in that I do have opportunities laid out in front of me. I hope that that is something that I can continually, I think that that has been influenced by grief. And I think that that is something I'd like to keep with me, I guess.